Right. Welcome everyone to another episode of Let's Talk Special Economic Zones. I'm your host, Ainsley Brown. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about the top five misnomers about special economic zones. And I suppose I should add six, really. I'll give a bonus. The first one is that zones are only for developing countries, and that's completely false. There are zones in both the developed and developing world. The United States, for example, has a very successful foreign trade zone program that it's operated for several years, and many other first world countries have zone programs that have been relatively successful. So it's not just a thing for developing countries, and there's well over 5,000 400 or so, or 600, 5,600 or so zones spread across the world. So with that many, it can't just be that, it's a developing world thing. The second, which is connected to the first, I guess, is that zones are considered foreign land or a foreign territory. That's not true, right? Zones are very much part of the territory or country that they belong to. And importantly, there's no such country called foreign land, right? It's so while there may be different rules that apply, there may be suspension. One of the fiscal incentives that's offered typically with zones is the suspension of customs duties until the next decision is made. If you bring it into the regular economy, the rest of the economy, the domestic territory, then goods that were imported into the zone and then brought into the rest of the economy, then duties apply. But it that by that action, that notion does not create it as being a or designate it as being a foreign territory. It is not. It's very much part of a country's economy, addition and territory. Additionally, with the modern zones that are WTO compliant, where there are no export subsidies, and there has to be that facilitation of two-way trade between the zone and the rest of the economy, uh, you don't have those barriers that once existed. Especially in I guess in the early 90s, 80s, 70s, and so forth, don't exist. Those have fallen. So you know, just because there are different rules that apply within the zone doesn't make it a foreign jurisdiction. It just means that it is part of the overall territory of a country. It's just that a different rule applies there, and that's not unusual in any respect. The third reason is that it's only for export processing. This is an old notion, a very, very, very old notion. That's what zones used to be focused on, export processing. They were basically export enclaves where labor, right, adding to labor or maximizing labor was the connectivity or the goal for the zones. But that's an old notion, largely because of the WTO's rules that got rid of export subsidies. It's not about just export processing. It's about zones now are about development. They're about economic development. There are zones, in fact, that are have moved well past even manufacturing. There are zones that are tourism focused, where there are hotels inside the zone or a part of the zone. There are others that are services focused, and it can be a variety of services from business process outsourcing to logistics to financial services. It varies right across the world. So it's not just about export processing of goods, manufacturing, and so forth. It's moved past. So it's manufacturing, but plus because there's so much more that goes on. The fourth reason is that they have lower labor and environmental standards. This again is an old notion, and you will find zones that do have lower environmental and labor standards. You'll find countries that have lower environmental and labor standards. zones of the past used to be where, because people, especially developing countries, wanted to attract investments, they, would lower their standards. Some of the countries had low standards anyway, but they would lower it and allow the companies to pay cheap wages and, have poor environmental practices and so forth. But a lot of this is no more for multiple reasons. The world has moved past that. If you check the zones, even in the notorious China for being polluting, but if you check certain zones in Tianjin, Suzhou, um, or the famous Shenzhen. These are zones that have strong environmental and labor practices. So the notion of zones being geared towards poor labor and poor environmental, that's an old notion. There are zones around the world, just as there are countries and companies and institutions that do practice that, but it is not the norm for zones. The fifth reason is that it is only zones are considered only for the quote unquote big boys or only for foreigners. That's wrong. It very much integrates and incorporates locals, and because money is money, whatever the investment is. Typically, though, I will admit that countries, when they develop a zone program, try to focus on attracting very large investors. That could be a local investor, but typically that means, especially in a developing world context, going outside the country and bringing in um, foreign direct investment. But also, the zones offer an opportunity for joint venture and other types of partnerships to be developed with locals. And foreign investors particularly like when locals have a certain degree of skin in the game. So whether they bring financial resources, land, intellectual property resource, whatever it is, the fact that they can bring something to the table makes that destination that much more attractive. In addition, zones also integrate small businesses. And importantly, and increasingly, you'll see that whether it's through some sort of linkages within the zones themselves or from the zones into the domestic territory, you'll find that there's much more emphasis on integrating small businesses, um, especially twinning them or marrying them with larger players, so that there is, especially focused around it being local MSMEs, so that the spillover effects of zones are much more concretized, are much more real, right? So these are the top five, but I'll give a sixth one as a bonus, and that is that special economic zones. You'll hear the term, and it's used very widely and very broadly, and sometimes you'll hear the term free zones, or sometimes you'll hear um, foreign trade zones, enterprise zone, industrial. It's all the same thing, right? It's all the same thing. What matters is the policy direction that you move in. So a country could have a free zone regime in the past, and then they've gone to special economic zones. That's a signal to the market that, hey, we've changed. Essentially, the critical elements of it are exactly the same, right? By definition, a geographic designated area that has different types of rules, trade rules, particularly that apply, particularly around customs. Um, that's what a zone is, right? But if you want to signal to the market that you're modernized, you've gone to something, especially away from the enclave export processing type of model to more of a developmental model, you change your name. So you could have changed it from free zone to special economic zone, or you could have said foreign trade zone, whatever you want to call it, right? The fundamentals are exactly the same. Critically, though, you're also signaling, typically, that is, I should say, that you are WTO compliant now. So you don't have any more export focused subsidies, and you are in compliant with basically the rules surrounding global economic governance, right? So if you like this episode, please like, share, subscribe. If you want to see me do a particular episode or a particular topic, cover a particular topic, just leave me a comment down below and I'll get right back to you. Bye for now.